Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this live webinar series on Legal Expert Guide to Data Breaches and Ransomware Attacks in Southeast Asia. My name is Ng Woan Na, and I'm the Regional Legal Advisor and representative of both ASEAN and China Desk based in our DFDL Bangkok office, and I'll be very pleased to be the moderator for today's discussion. And just a brief introduction on DFDL, we are a full legal and tax advisory firm based in Southeast Asia. An ASEAN-born firm with nearly 30 years of history, we have developed dedicated regional and sector-based key practice group with technology and compliance being one of them. So our discussion for today will discuss on the prevalence of data breach incidents and ransomware attack in Cambodia. And as all of us may be aware, incidents on this front have increased at an escalating speed as the result of a shift of global consumers' usage towards online services, and with companies collecting and increasing volumes of data contributed primarily as the result of COVID-19. So it is critical now more than ever for businesses and consumers like us to take data security seriously. And a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. You can post your questions at any time in the right-hand Q&A window. We will do our best to read and consider all questions, but depending on the amount of time and questions we have, we will unfortunately not be able to address all of them. Of course, you're very welcome to email our speaker for any further specific question. I would now like to introduce our speaker for today, Mr. Simon Burlinson. He is a senior consultant based in our Cambodia office, and he is an English qualified solicitor who trained to work in London before coming to Cambodia years ago. He is formerly a European Data Protection Manager at BNY Mellon, so he will be briefing us today on not just about the data protection regime in Cambodia, but also some of the detailed perspective by reference to the practical experiences being at the forefront as a data protection manager. Great having you here, Simon, and thank you for participating in today's session.
Thank you very much for having me, Ng. Very happy to contribute, and I'm looking forward to it. A lot to get through in 30 minutes. So let's crack on.
Yep, so let's kickstart our session for today. And for the first question, Simon, in the context of your jurisdiction in Cambodia, please, can you share with us in terms of the level of growing prevalence of ransomware attacks, as well as the top harms resulted from data breach, and also the industry most commonly affected by such incidents? And of course, this can be made based on your advisory experiences, as well as statistics published by the local authority in Cambodia.
And unpublished, I'd go so far as to say, and I'll explain why. Possibly in Cambodia, ransomware threats and threat actors aren't as common as in more developed jurisdictions, and one assumes because there are higher returns for threat actors targeting more lucrative opportunities in higher income countries. We've advised a number of clients in just the DFDL office in Cambodia during the last few years in relation to suspected cyber hacks where personal data and or credit card data or any other data has been accessed without authorization. And in many of the cases, they come from a referring law firm, and the law firm won't disclose the name of the client. And I think these are for obvious reasons, not least because they might be subject to strict confidentiality obligations to their client until they've done their risk assessment. The ultimate client has done their risk assessment. They don't want details of a data breach or a suspected data breach getting out. That said, I think almost without exception, possibly one or two exceptions, the cases related to suspected data breaches that originated in a different country but may have passed through servers in Cambodia or related to Cambodian customers. So not necessarily a breach that occurred in this country. So as I said, even though they might not be as common in Cambodia, there have been some notable and albeit anecdotal cases of ransomware attacks in Cambodia. You might remember in 2012, the Cambodian government announced, or the press picked up on an announcement by the Cambodian government that they were drafting a cybercrime law. And this sparked fears that it would extend traditional media restraint to the online world. After and as a result of the announcement, a hacker group called Null Crew launched a campaign named Operation the Pirate Bay to attack Cambodian websites in a protest against internet censorship, and it related to the arrest of the 27-year-old co-founder of the Pirate Bay, who I understand was living in Cambodia at the time. At around the same time, and possibly because of the draft cybercrime law and the anecdotal thinking on the internet that it would impinge on individuals' data privacy rights, the hacktivist collective called Anonymous, which is probably the most famous, apparently caused over 5,000 documents to be stolen and leaked from Cambodia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To our knowledge, these haven't been confirmed by the royal government of Cambodia, and we make no assertion as to their accuracy. Top harms from data breach. The harms to an entity as a result of a data breach aren't any different in Cambodia as they would be in any other jurisdiction, save for a notable lack of comprehensive data protection or data breach notification laws in this country. That said, the harms resulting from data breach can generally be categorized into costs to organizations, and these can be further broken down into the unavoidable costs that are consequent on compliance with data breach laws. For example, fines from regulators simply because a law has been breached. And as alluded to earlier, this isn't so applicable in Cambodia because there isn't yet an overarching data breach notification law. Other costs to organizations, costs that might be necessary to restore brand image, and these costs are over and above the minimum legal requirements that might be applied by supervisory authorities. But they represent a genuine attempt by an organization to make things up to their consumers, you know, to put them right. And these could be best described as best practice restitution measures. For example, costs resulting from notifying customers of a data breach, taking steps to restore confidence in the organization, putting out press releases, this kind of thing. These are all going to cost an organization money. Still under the subheading of costs to organizations, costs resulting from consumer churn. In the short term, these are going to be very difficult to quantify. But as higher profile Google cases, where you would have read about them in other jurisdictions, consumers are going to leave if they lose confidence in a brand, if they lose confidence in particularly a data heavy brand, Google, Facebook, Apple. Consumers are going to go somewhere else. And so the cost of this churn, the cost of loss of custom is difficult in the short term to quantify, but it's certainly, to my mind, one of the greatest costs of a data breach. And then we have the more I would say not existential, but the less directly related costs. And those are costs resulting from legal action. In the US, this is mostly seen as mass tort litigation, which is a very interesting development. And it's seen particularly in the US, and it's creeping into the UK. I haven't seen it yet in Cambodia, but director and officer insurance covering data breaches becoming quite a market. So those are some of the costs to organizations. But then, of course, we've got the costs to the customers affected by the data breach, the financial impacts on the customers, the distress caused to the customers, costs to banks, depending on the industry. If the data breach includes bank data, there are going to be indirect costs to the banks responding to customer queries and closing and reissuing bank accounts. And then, of course, as another category, we've got costs incurred through the fraudulent purchase of goods. And there we get into the territory of where liability vests. Does it vest with the responsible organization, the shops or merchants that took the payment, by the company that was originally responsible for the breach, and this might be a third-party service provider, or will it be the credit or debit card organization? So determining that liability is the cost to the organization, it's a cost to banks, it's a cost to shops and merchants. That said, notwithstanding the unquantifiable reputational damage a data breach can cause in Cambodia, any person who privately, and this is, I'll speak to more to the sectoral regulations covering data breaches in Cambodia, but in Cambodia, if a person who privately retains information in electronic form who commits an act in breach of Article 32 of the e-commerce law, which is a short two-paragraph clause that relates to data protection, i.e. the company doesn't use all means to ensure that such information is safely protected in all reasonable circumstances, that company can be punished by, or the directors of that company could be punished by imprisonment from 1 to 2 years and subject to a fine of between $500 and $1,000. So to the third point of this first question, industries most commonly affected. As I previously mentioned, we're not necessarily informed of the company potentially affected by a breach or a ransomware threat. Of those we are aware, it's been almost exclusively in the telecoms and insurance sector. But hackers are going to, or nefarious actors, threat actors, they're going to target companies, organizations, victims where they get the most return on them, on their efforts. So these are going to be where the information breach has black market value, banking, financial information, credit card information, or they're going to do it to disrupt a company and force it to pay a ransom. And these guys, these threat actors, they're getting so much more sophisticated. They know the GDPR, they know the law as well as many lawyers. And there are anecdotal reports of threat actors notifying regulatory authorities that they will exfiltrate and publish information. And so they're forewarning regulators before ransoming the victim. So they're clever people. That said, no one's safe. I remember back in 2014, my computer was subject to a ransomware email, which I stupidly clicked on and didn't recognize it for what it was. Luckily, the firm I worked for at the time had a fantastic data breach policy, had a fantastic IT policy, and was able to contain it. I lost all the data on my laptop, but thankfully it didn't infect the system. And it goes back to Einstein's famous quote about the two infinites, the universe and human stupidity, and he wasn't so convinced about the first one. So I hope that answers your first question, Woan.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Simon, for sharing this. So indeed, a security incident, be it major or minor, it can be devastating to organizations and leading, as what you mentioned, a severe and irreparable reputational damage and possibly loss of customers and or trust. And I also note that you mentioned about a draft cybercrime law is on the way and the sector specific governing law, which is the e-commerce law. But aside from these two legislation, can you share with us if there are any further governing laws regulating data breach incidents in Cambodia, please?
There are certainly sectoral laws. Is there any law governing data breach incidents? As with data protection, no, there's no overarching or consolidated law governing in Cambodia data protection or data breach. So the short answer is no. As with data protection, provisions relating to data breach incidents, they're governed, if at all, and with a certain amount of interpretation. They're governed by sectoral laws and regulations. For example, we've got Articles 317 to 320 and 427 to 432 of the Criminal Code, Cambodian Criminal Code of 2009, which deal with crimes called infringement on the secrecy of correspondence and telecommunications, and the 427 to 432 offences in the information technology sector. And these, to my knowledge, are the foundations upon which Cambodians' legal framework in relation to data breaches are based. As you mentioned previously, and as I mentioned, Article 32 of the e-commerce law provides for certain data protection measures an entity has to implement, and the sanctions for breach thereof. We have Article 31 of the e-commerce law and its associated penalties that makes it an offence to create electronic systems with the purpose of falsification or causing confusion in order to take advantage of or attract usage or transactions to cause damage to persons who use it or to third parties. Article 43 and the associated penalties under Article 62 of the e-commerce law speak to breach of encryption applied to electronic evidence. We have Article 66 of the Telecoms Law 2015, which provides a general prohibition to any action in the communication sector that may affect public order and lead to national security. And as we both mentioned, the draft cybercrime law was apparently drafted in 2012, but to our knowledge, there's no publicly available version of it, and so these anecdotal things you see on human rights websites decrying its infringement of individual privacy are unfounded at the moment. But there is a draft cybercrime law, that much is true, but I haven't seen it, and no one in our office has seen it. All of that said, Cambodia has recently, in 2021, in July 2021, the MPTC, Ministry of Posts and Telecoms, issued a notification on ransomware and prevention measures, and it guides users on how to deal with ransomware and how to prevent being subject to a ransomware attack. Literally, it states, and I quote this, If you are the victim of ransomware, please do not pay the ransom because there is no guarantee you will be provided the access to your files. Notably, and we'll come on to this possibly a bit later in the time we have, it does not say you shall not pay the ransom. It advises you not to pay the ransom. So while appropriate law is being drafted in Cambodia, the Cambodian government is evidently aware that these issues occur and they are happening to Cambodian companies and they are affecting Cambodian companies, they're affecting Cambodian citizens. So we'll have to wait in Cambodia to see how these developments, which are very encouraging, play out, and so hopefully we'll see something in the next 12 months, something more concrete.
Thank you, Simon, for this high level response from the legal domain. So from the information that you have presented, we understand that there are currently no specific laws governing data breach incidents in Cambodia. Sectoral laws impose certain requirements on companies in those industries, but in terms of the overarching data breach regulation, it continues to evolve. And the establishment of the independent supervisory authority, the cybercrime unit in the National Police Department, also reflects the growing awareness on the part of the Cambodian government to regulate data protection. And of course, we know that cyber criminals, they do not discriminate, and we are seeing more new sophisticated forms of attack emerge regularly. So from this perspective, practically, how should an organization respond to an internal and external data breach incident? Can you share with us some of the top cybersecurity best practices, Simon? You're on mute, yeah.
Sorry, I was on mute. These aren't specific to Cambodia, but they are universal. Have a response plan. Number one, have a response plan. When the phone rings, what is really key is when that moment happens and the phone rings, the first 48 hours to 72 hours are crucial. And if I can, I'm sorry to stretch the analogy, as I will, but I'm going to make a medical analogy. The first step is to do triage. You need to stop the bleeding within the first 48 hours to 72 hours. I think 72 hours is the time limit imposed by UK law, the Information Commissioner's Office in the UK. But it's generally accepted that the 48 hours and between 48 and 72 hours is crucial. Before you do anything else, before you phone the police, before you notify customers, you need to triage, you need to stop the bleeding. And it's incredibly important during this period to have a level of efficiency and clear direction about understanding what can be identified during this time, because it's going to be out of the blue. The compliance officer or the CEO or the COO is going to get a phone call, and it's panic stations. Have a data breach response plan in place. And when this happens, when you get the call, if anyone has had this call, and if you have a data breach response plan in place, excellent, well done. The next step, if you haven't, call us. If you have, you need to make sure it works. You need to develop some muscle memory. You need to do blank firing tests. And those typically relate to finding out who's patient zero. And I said I'd stretch the medical analogy. Who's patient zero? Where did the breach occur? Sometimes it's a third party service provider or vendor. Other times it's an employee leaving a hard drive on a train or in a tuk-tuk, or leaving documents or a briefcase on public transport. Breaches don't necessarily need to be by very sophisticated hackers or groups like Anonymous. They are usually because of the stupidity of employees. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for a poll. I wish we did, but please get in contact. If you haven't got a data breach policy, let us know and we can help you. But those are, let me do this. And we have, these move quickly to secure your systems, fix vulnerabilities that may have caused the breach, mobilize your breach response team if you have one. If you haven't got one, this should be part of your plan. Identify the numbers potentially affected, identify the potential monetary effect these breaches may have. I have a list of 12 or 15 here. Please get in contact. I see we're running out of time. I'm talking too much. Please get in contact after this, and I can speak more to that. Sorry, Woan.
Thank you, Simon, for sharing with us some of the practical and useful suggestions, both legal and technical solutions. So moving to my next and also the final question, Simon, and this relates to in the case of a transfer of data from Cambodia to other countries. Can you discuss some of the precautionary measures which companies can take to better prepare for such transaction in order to prevent any potential international data breach incident?
Well, there are two prongs to that question, actually. International data transfers are generally electronic. And so that would come down to a company complying with the various data security and data breach standards, international standards that are out there. Some of them are, the one I'm most familiar with is ISO 27001. I understand there's an American centric FIPS 142. I'm more familiar with the ISO 27001. So there are industry standard protocols out there that a company should adopt and adapt depending on your business. Other top 5 tips: train your users. As I mentioned, Einstein said, only 2 things are infinite, the universe and human stupidity, and I'm not sure about the former. So human error, mistake, is the #1 cause of all data breaches globally. And this can be because of clicking malicious links, disclosing passwords to unauthorized persons, simply providing too much information on social media, or leaving a briefcase in a tuk-tuk or on a plane or on a train. So the best tip I can give is try and prevent it in the first place. So train your users, have weapons grade backups. It's all well and good to have backups on locally, stored locally. You need them stored remotely so that ransomware encrypts just a laptop and not a server over in America or Ukraine, wherever it may be. Encrypt all personal data, block ports on laptops so people can't remove data, or if they do, make sure all data is encrypted. Keep up with patches, operating system and applications need to be kept patched and updated, and don't allow hard copy documents to leave the office, and don't leave them around the photocopier, please. Please don't leave them around the photocopier. So I hope that answers the question, and I hope we have some time. I'm sorry, I've rambled too much, for some questions. Do we?
You No worries. Thank you, Simon, for this sharing your thoughts and valuable inputs on this topic. So now we will move on to our Q&A session. Take a few minutes to go through some of them. Let's see what we have at this stage. So yes, Simon, a question for you is payment of a ransom demanded by the malicious implanters of ransomware to an IT system a criminal offense in Cambodia?
So no is the short answer. And while I don't purport to advise on English law, interestingly, there was an English case. It was a Lord Justice Ricks in the UK in the Supreme Court. In the case of Bunga Melati Dua, it concerned a tanker that was captured by Somali pirates while en route between Malaysia and Rotterdam. And so international law was incredibly important during that case. The conclusion of Lord Justice Ricks, and it was a unanimous conclusion between all the lords in that case, there's no evidence of ransom payments being illegal anywhere in the world. This is despite the realization that payment of the ransom itself encourages exacting more ransoms. And so, in Cambodia, we have the anti-money laundering law. But there has to be an element of knowledge. If you're paying a ransom and you know it's going to be used for criminal financing or for money laundering or to finance terrorism, that's an offence. That's not necessarily the case with ransomware. You have we have CAMSA. I've spoken about that. So essentially, no, it's not a criminal code, makes it an offense to provide payment when you know that payment is going to be used for criminal purposes. That in our conclusion, as we've advised clients, is not applicable to ransomware. So the short answer is no, it's not a criminal offense anywhere in the world, and it's not a criminal offense in Cambodia to pay ransoms for ransomware attacks. But it is something companies need to consider.
Thanks, Simon, for this insightful discussion. It is now the end of this webinar. Of course, we want to take on more questions, but it's already 30 minutes. So it goes without saying that data breach response plan has become a critical component of doing business in this modern era. So for companies who have yet to create one or need to refresh one, we hope this session will be a useful tool and that you will find some useful suggestions, key consideration, as well as the needed attention when it comes to creating a new set of plan or to refine an existing one for the purpose of improving the data security posture. So if you have any related question, please do not hesitate to reach out to Simon or myself via emails as indicated on this page. And this session has been recorded and will be available at our DFDL website and social media. We thank you for your attention, and it is very honored to have all of you participating in this webinar. See you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.